Michigan and Washington face off in a rematch of last season's national title game. Michigan won the championship game 34-13, but both teams look very much different this year. Michigan 4-1, 2-0 in the Big Ten is coming off a close win over Minnesota, extending their conference win streak to 27 games. Washington is 3-2, 1-1 in the Big Ten, and has a new head coach in Jed Fish and nearly a full roster of new starters, new transfers, new everything. Washington's losses have been close, including a 21-18 defeat at Rutgers last week. Key players: Michigan's Kalel Mullins has 540 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, and Washington's Jonah Coleman has 104.2 rushing yards per game, and QB Will Rogers has 1,354 yards passing, 10 touchdowns. This will be Michigan's first road game of the season in a hostile environment. And Zach, Washington is favored. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts were I was going to put an upset alert until I realized that the favorite was Washington, because I think Washington's going to win.
Wow. Well, so I have a couple things. And I'm not trying to fight for Michigan here, so don't get mad at me. But Will Johnson is probably going to be back. Sure. Josiah Stewart is probably going to be back in this one. They were both missing against Minnesota, so I do think that plays an impact. And the Washington, I forget his name off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up. The Washington defensive tackle has a torn Achilles, and he is now out for the year. So you're having players lost from Washington, and you are gaining 2 players back from Michigan. Does that play a factor at all to you, Zach?
No.
Wow. All right.
So I think there's a couple reasons why. One, so I do think the offensive tackle for being out for Washington does play a factor, and Josiah Stewart being back, certainly, because Michigan's defensive line, when healthy, we're talking about top 5 defensive lines. They are a top 5 defensive line in the country, with Josiah Stewart, with Mason Graham, with
I would
Kenneth
say
Grant.
Starters. Top defensive line starters.
Starters. Yeah. I'm not talking. Here's my butt.
I think it falls off when you see Benny and the other defensive tackle go in there. I think that's when you have to rush up the middle. Anyway, go ahead, Zach. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and this is my butt. But when Kenneth Grant gets tired, which we've brought up multiple times on this show, they're a liability.
Yep.
And I think while Will Johnson has been great, I don't know if he's been best corner in the country great, he's been very good.
Yeah, credit to Will Johnson. He's been very good. He's, had a couple pick sixes and stuff like that, but he's also been cooked a number of times. Yeah. And quarterbacks just either haven't thrown it or they threw it and they missed. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, so the reality is this will be the 3rd team that they've faced that have had multiple receivers that I think scare you. Giles Jackson, Denzel Boston. Denzel Boston is having himself a heck of a year so far. 30 catches, 412 yards, 7 touchdowns. And you got a quarterback who's been around the block for a bit, and Will Rogers, who I think has played pretty good ball.
Oh yeah.
And here's the nightmare scenario for Michigan. You go on the road and you get down quick, 14-0. And all of a sudden, you don't have the ability to get back in this game because you don't have a quarterback that can throw. So that's I think that's the biggest struggle is at some point, I think Washington's defense is good enough to hold Michigan's run game at bay to start the game, to get a lead. And I think if they get a 2-score lead, it's over.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, and I want to preface this, Michigan fans, I've sung your praises this season, so don't get mad at me and call me a hater or anything like that. But I'm just going to be real for a second. Michigan needs to win a certain way. There are a lot of teams out there that can win, but they need to win a certain way. Michigan has to get up by 2 or 3 scores in the first half in order to win a game. It just has to happen. You have to be up because in the second half, your defense gets tired. And let's just be honest, I think this is the bigger factor than getting tired. Wink Martindale does not adjust. Wink Martindale runs the same base defense the entire game. And I'll give him credit. He has blitzed less these past couple weeks because he's realized that he doesn't need to with his defensive line, but that is starting to affect things towards the end of the game. He starts blitzing more toward the end of the game, and then guys get open on the back end. I think even if he's not blitzing in this one, I think that Washington's offensive line is better at pass protection than USC's. And on top of that, I think Will Rogers is a more experienced quarterback who is doing more at the line of scrimmage, checking and getting his guys to shift protection much better than a Miller Moss was doing at USC. And on top of that, Giles Jackson and Denzel Boston, like this is one of, I won't say if the best because I think Ohio State has the best, but this is one of the best wide receiver duos in the country. Will Johnson can only cover one of them. And Will Rogers is savvy enough that if he sees Will Johnson creeping up, he's going to pump, and Will Johnson's going to bite, and the guy's going to get by him. Like this is not, you're not facing Max Brosmer who's playing FBS football for the very first time. You're not facing Miller Moss who is his first year starting, who albeit has been very good and he's very talented, but it's his first year starting. You are facing Will Rogers, a veteran quarterback who, in my mind, the only reason this team is not 5-0 is because the kicker hasn't kicked and Jed Fish has made stupid calls. And unless that happens again in this one, I think Washington comes out on top.
Yeah. I think that's the big if, right? Is are they going to play undisciplined, and is Jed Fish going to call things like a speed option to the boundary on 4th and 1?
Right. The undisciplined play as well is something that has to be considered. Yes.
Yeah. But I think we're on the same wavelength. I've got 24-13 Washington over Michigan.
I have it a little bit closer. I think that Michigan will move the ball a little bit and they'll have some better time of possession, but I think that they'll stall out once they get into the other side of the field, and I think they'll kick maybe 3 or 4 field goals in this one. And I think you see Washington. And I think Washington will not try to kick very many field goals. They might try to kick 1 or 2, but they're not going to try to kick very many. And I think Washington wins this one 21-19. Now I will say, as much as I am singing the praise of Will Rogers does have to be better on 3rd down. I've seen a number of incompletions from Will Rogers the past few weeks. I wonder if I can get the ESPN splits for it really fast, but he's not been fantastic, at least the past couple of weeks on 3rd down. I don't know what the splits look like. Of course, those could be a little influence one way or the other, but that's goal to go. I don't want to do. Okay. 23 for 34, 68% completion percentage, and 5.9 yards per attempt. He's been sacked once, 3 carries for negative 13 yards. So, it's not bad numbers, but on 3rd down, you'd like to see somebody be over 70% completion percentage, especially when you have the run game of Jonah Coleman, who is going to oftentimes have you in favorable 3rd down situations.
Yeah. Agreed.
So that's going to be a big part for him. So
yeah, I think that continues to play into just the weakness of Washington, which is undisciplined play, not good situationally. And so I think that is something we have to watch out for in this game. Is I think Washington, from a roster standpoint, actually might be better suited to win this game. But do they play well enough from a discipline standpoint, from a situational football standpoint? But I just don't think Michigan has the team that can come back, and I don't think they're going to score early.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We got Troy in the chat. He Ohio State fan says Washington 72. Last second field goal, so they get shut out. That would be one for the record books there, Troy. But he says if you're gonna dream large. Thanks, Troy. And then G Gamed, he disagrees with us. He says Washington is not beating Michigan, and looks like he's laughing there. Zach, I think there's a good chance Washington beats
Yeah.
Michigan.
It seems like Steely Matt is saying that those are comments made by someone else.
Yeah, he's quoting what Michigan fans have told him. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's acting like a Michigan fan in the chat.
Ah,
Um, Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not one of those people that is obviously like, oh, Michigan sucks and they just get lucky and stuff like that. I think there are aspects of what Michigan does well. Again, I
yeah.
I have told Michigan fans what they do well. I'm not just some hater. But I also look at this game and say Washington has a good run defense. Now we'll see what
Yeah.
happens without their starting defensive tackle, but they do have a good run defense. This is a defense that's been good against the run this season. And
Yep.
I think that they do have a good quarterback and good weapons on the outside. And I think if you're going to attack this Michigan defense, you're going to have good weapons on the outside, and you're going to have an experienced quarterback who is able to toss the ball around, which Will Rogers is. So I
Yeah.
mean, obviously the big factor here is if if this Michigan defensive line can get huge pressure on Will Rogers the entire game. I think they will in the first half. We'll see if it happens
Yeah.
the entire game though.
I one other factor, and I think you already mentioned it, but I think it's important to highlight. Jonah Coleman last game against a good run defense in Rutgers, 16 carries, 148 yards.
Yeah.
Jonah Coleman's going to be a problem in this game, especially in the second half when Kenneth Grant is tired.
Yeah.
Because I think they'll run. I think they'll run right at the backup defensive tackles, and I think Jonah Coleman will have a big day.
I mean, if this game is tied or if Michigan is only up one score at halftime, I mean, put money on Washington because Washington's going to come out and have a much better second half. Every team has. Arkansas State. I mean, Texas is the only team that didn't because they stopped trying in the second half. But Arkansas State, Minnesota, who was the other team? USC. Like they've all had much more successful second halves than they did first halves. So Michigan, if they're not up by 3 scores in this one in the first half, like it's probably not going to
It's
go well
gonna be
for them.
rough. Yeah.
So. PSU Jim says Rutgers ran for 184 yards against Washington. Washington D isn't that good against the run. I mean, but Rutgers is also they also have Kyle Monangai and Samuel Brown. So
Yeah.
I see what you're saying there, PSU Jim, but like I think that's also one of the best rushing attacks in the nation.
Yeah.
What do you think, Zach?
Well, I mean, Kyle Monangai led the Big Ten last year.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy to look at the helmet and be like, well, Rutgers isn't very good. I would push back and say, like, Kyle Monangai and Sam Brown is one of the best 1-2 punches, and their offensive line is actually pretty good this year.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Rutgers has one of the best offensive lines in the nation. That's no joke.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, who did they lose? Who did they lose last game though? They lost. Was it Needham? Needleham?
Oh,
No,
I don't remember.
they lost one of their offensive linemen last game, so I don't know if that'll affect them. But he says Rutgers is pretty good, but Michigan has a better O line than Rutgers. No,
I
not this
don't
season.
know.
Not this
Evan
season,
Link
Jim.
is not.
Evan Link is awful. That center is awful. Miles Hinton just got hurt. He might be back next game, but even he's not very good.
Yeah.
That guard duo is not great.
Yeah.
I know
Evan,
Michigan has had a great offensive line the past few years, but this offensive line is nowhere near what we've seen the past few
yeah.
years. So,
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely been a little bit of growth, but
I mean, you
it's
still see
not
on every
good.
pass play, though, Evan Link is getting beat. I
Yeah.
mean, it's almost every single pass play.
Yeah.
And that center's getting pushed back every single time,
Yeah.
whether it's Crippen or Giudice, both
It's
times.
it's I think it's easy to make the assumption because of the helmet.
Right.
But
And like I said, Hinton might not be back. And I don't even think Hinton's been all that good. But who
yeah.
was it that came in for him? Was it Petrie? I didn't think Petrie was all that good when he came in
Yeah.
for him against Minnesota.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm a Buckeye hater. If I'm a Buckeye hater, it is what it is. But
Yeah.
that's my thoughts.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Melo's with us, though. He says, no, they don't. Rutgers O-line is running for the Joe Moore Award. He also says, the season is early. However, they're on pace for it. It's true.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
true. Rutgers. I need to look up who the offensive lineman was that got injured, though. I need to figure that out.